The roast was already dry by the time my father decided to ruin dinner. That's the detail that sticks with me most. Not the shock, not the words themselves, but the way my mother kept chewing, even after he said it, like her body was trying to pretend nothing irreversible had just happened. We were seated around the long oak table in my parents' dining room, the one my father loved to brag about because it had belonged to his grandfather. Heavy, solid, impossible to move once it was set in place. He liked furniture that stayed where he put it. So did he like people. My husband squeezed my knee under the table as my father cleared his throat. That sound alone used to make my shoulders tense. Old reflex, childhood conditioning. You learn quickly what noises precede humiliation. This family, my father began, lifting his wine glass slightly, has always been built on honesty. My brother glanced up from his plate. My sister-in-law smiled politely. My mother stared at the gravy boat. I felt it then, that prickle at the base of my neck, the quiet warning that something was wrong. "I think it's time," my father continued, "that we stop pretending." My heart started to pound, not fast but heavy, measured, like something large shifting its weight. "Dad?" I said carefully. He waved a dismissive hand. "Let me finish." I closed my mouth. "I've carried this long enough," he said, "and frankly, I'm tired of the disrespect." Disrespect. That word was his favorite weapon. He used it to justify everything, from silent treatments to public lectures, to the way he never once apologized in his life. My husband's grip tightened. My father turned his head slowly and looked directly at me. "You should know," he said, voice steady, almost satisfied, "that you were adopted." The room went silent. Not the cinematic kind of silence where gasps echo and forks clatter to the floor. The worst kind. The kind where no one breathes because they're all waiting to see who breaks first. I felt nothing at first. No shock, no confusion, no heartbreak. Just a strange, hollow calm, like my body had stepped aside and let something older take over. My mother still didn't look up. My brother's mouth hung slightly open. What? My father kept his eyes on me. "I didn't think this needed to be announced like this," my brother said, looking between us. "Well, it does," my father snapped. "She's been acting like she's entitled to opinions lately." There it was. This wasn't about truth, it was about control. My sister-in-law shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, maybe this isn't—" "She deserves to know," my father interrupted, "especially since she keeps forgetting her place." I swallowed. "Dad?" I said slowly. "What are you talking about?" He leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying this now. "You've always been different, too independent, too sensitive, too ungrateful. Your mother and I took you in, gave you everything, and this is how you repay us?" My hands were steady on the table. "You're saying I'm adopted," I repeated. "Yes, and frankly, it explains a lot." My mother finally spoke.
"Please stop," she whispered. He ignored her. "I didn't want to tell you like this," he continued, lying without blinking, "but you've pushed me." Pushed him? By disagreeing with him earlier about selling the family land? By not backing down when he insulted my husband? By acting like I had equal footing at a table he believed he owned? I looked around the room, at the walls covered in family photos, at my face in nearly every frame, at baby pictures my mother used to show strangers with pride. Something didn't add up. "Where was I adopted from?" I asked quietly. My father hesitated, just a fraction too long. "That's not relevant." "When?" I pressed. He waved his hand again. "Years ago. You were a baby." My heart thudded once. Hard. He didn't know. He didn't know because it wasn't true, but he thought it was powerful. My brother leaned forward. "Dad, this doesn't make sense. Why would you—" "Stay out of it," my father snapped. "This is between me and her." I looked at my mother. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her eyes shiny. That's when I knew. She hadn't agreed to this, which meant this was not some long-held family secret. This was a weapon he'd decided to use tonight. I stood slowly. My chair scraped against the floor, loud in the quiet room. My father smirked. "Sit down." "No," I said calmly. "If you're going to tell stories about my life, I'm going to stand." "You're being dramatic," he scoffed. "No," I replied. "I'm being accurate." My husband stood with me. "I think we should take a break," my brother said nervously. But I wasn't done. "Dad," I said, "why now?" He smiled thinly. "Because you needed to be reminded." "Reminded of what?" I asked. "That you owe us," he said. "That you don't get to challenge me." There it was. Not adoption. Ownership. I nodded slowly, like I was considering his words. Then I said something he didn't expect. "Do you remember the blue cassette tape?" The smirk faltered. "Excuse me?" he said. "The blue cassette tape," I repeated. "The one you kept in the desk drawer in your study." My mother's head snapped up. My father's face changed. Just slightly.
You used to record things, I continued. Arguments, phone calls, for your records, you said. My father's jaw tightened. That has nothing to do with this. It does, I said, because you forgot something about that tape. My brother frowned. What tape? My hands were still steady. You forgot, I said, that I copied it. The room felt smaller. My father laughed once, sharp and forced. You're bluffing. No, I said softly. I'm prepared. My husband reached into his jacket pocket, and that's when my father finally looked afraid. Not angry, afraid. Because for the first time in his life, the story wasn't his to tell. And if you're still here, still holding your breath with me at this table, stay. Because what comes next is the moment everything he built on lies starts to collapse. And stories like this, the ones where truth finally gets its turn to speak, are why I share them here. Some people follow for entertainment. Others stay because they recognize the room. If you recognize it too, you already know where to be. And dinner was just getting started. You could hear the house settling, that faint creak of old wood adjusting to pressure, like even the walls knew something heavy had shifted. My father stared at my husband's jacket pocket as if it were a loaded weapon. "Sit down," he said again, but his voice wasn't commanding this time. It was brittle. "No," I replied. "You've had the floor for decades. Tonight, I get a turn." My mother stood up suddenly, her chair scraping back. "Please," she said, her voice shaking, "can we not do this tonight?" My father snapped his head toward her. "You stay out of it." That was the wrong move. I turned to her. "Mom," I said gently, "did you know he was going to say this?" Her eyes filled instantly. "No," she whispered. "I swear I didn't." That alone dismantled half of what he'd tried to build. My brother pushed his plate away. "Dad, this is insane. You don't just announce something like that at dinner." My father slammed his palm on the table. "I absolutely do when I'm being disrespected in my own house." There it was again. Ownership. House. Table. People. I took a slow breath. "You didn't announce it because it's true. You announced it because you thought it would humiliate me." He scoffed. "You humiliate yourself." "Then why are your hands shaking?" I asked calmly. Everyone noticed then. His fingers were curled tightly around the stem of his wineglass.
knuckles pale. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you're not derailing this conversation. Oh, I'm not derailing it, I'm finishing it. My husband reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object. Not dramatic, not flashy.
Just a plain, rectangular cassette recorder, the same cheap model my father used to carry everywhere in the 90s. My brother sucked in a sharp breath. Is that? Yes, I said. It's that. My father stood up so fast his chair tipped backward. You put that away, he barked. No, I said again. You've said no to me my whole life. Tonight, it's nigh word. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth. Where did you get that? My father demanded. You gave it to me when I was 16. You wanted me to transcribe one of your important recordings. You forgot to take it back. That doesn't mean anything, he snapped. You're right. The recorder doesn't mean anything. I pressed a button. What it recorded does. The room filled with a faint click. Then static. Then a voice. My father's voice. Clear, confident, familiar. She's not adopted. I don't know why you keep saying that. It just shuts her up when she starts acting like she has rights. My mother gasped. My brother stood up abruptly. What the hell is that? My father lunged forward. Turn that off. I didn't. Another click. Another segment. If she thinks she owes us, she won't question anything. That's how you keep control. The word control echoed in the room like a slap. My mother collapsed back into her chair. Oh my God, she whispered. My father's face had gone gray. That's edited, he shouted. You spliced that. I was 16. I barely knew how to rewind properly. You taught me how to record. You never taught me how to lie. My brother stared at my father like he was seeing him for the first time. You told her she was adopted just to shut her up, he said slowly. My father's mouth opened, then closed. That was private, he said weakly. So was my childhood, I replied. You didn't protect that either. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was devastated. My mother stood again, this time unsteady. You told me, she said, voice trembling, that you would never use our children like that. He rounded on her. You're exaggerating. Stop, she said sharply. That word had never come out of her mouth directed at him before. You stood there, she continued, pointing at him, and let our daughter believe something was wrong with her for years. I never said, you let her believe she didn't belong, my mother said. Do you know what that did to her? My father looked around the table, searching for support. There was none. I clicked the recorder off. I didn't bring this out to destroy you, I said quietly. I brought it out to stop you. He laughed bitterly. You think this makes you some kind of hero? No, I replied. It makes me done. My brother shook his head slowly. You used fear to control us, he said. All of us. My father turned to him. Don't you start. But my brother didn't stop. She never talked back, he continued. She always apologized. She always tried harder, and you liked that. My father's voice cracked. I did what I had to do. To keep control, I said. You said it yourself. My husband finally spoke. She doesn't owe you anything, he said calmly. Not gratitude, not silence, not obedience. My father sneered. You turned her against me. I smiled faintly. No, I said. You recorded yourself doing that. The weight of it settled. Years of power drained out of the room in real time. My mother walked over to me slowly. I'm so sorry, she whispered, pulling me into her arms. I didn't know. I hugged her back. I know, I said. That's why I waited. My father sank into his chair. This is betrayal, he muttered. No, I replied. This is accountability. I picked up my purse. We're leaving, I said. My father looked up sharply. You don't get to walk away after this. I do, I said. I always did. You just convinced me I couldn't. At the door, I turned back once. You announced I was adopted to put me in my place, I said. What you actually did was give me mine. We stepped into the night air. My hands were shaking now, but not from fear, from release. Behind us, the house stayed silent. No shouting, no commands, no authority left to enforce. And if you're still following this story, still feeling that tightness in your chest, it's because you recognize something familiar, the kind of power that survives only in secrecy, the kind of truth that changes everything once it's spoken. There are more stories like this, stories about people finally hearing the click of a recorder they forgot existed. You don't have to be told to know where to find them. Sometimes you stay because part of you is already listening. We didn't speak in the car at first, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had finally been said. Streetlights passed in a steady rhythm, each one briefly illuminating my husband's face as he drove. His jaw was tight, eyes focused straight ahead, like if he looked at me too long, the whole night might crack open again. I stared out the window, my reflection ghosted over the dark glass. I didn't feel victorious. I felt unanchored. When your entire childhood has been built around someone else's version of reality, the moment that reality collapses doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like vertigo, like suddenly realizing the ground you learned to balance on was never solid to begin with. You okay? My husband asked quietly. I think so, I said. I just didn't expect it to hurt this much.
He reached over and squeezed my hand. Truth usually does, even when it sets you free. We got home late. I didn't turn on any lights, just kicked off my shoes and sat on the edge of the couch, still wearing my coat. My phone buzzed. A message from my brother. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I stared at it for a long time before replying. I know. Another message followed almost immediately. Mom is a mess. Dad locked himself in the study. That didn't surprise me. My father always retreated to rooms with doors he could close. I set the phone down and finally let myself breathe. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was replaying the dinner, but because memories I'd never questioned before were suddenly rearranging themselves. The way my father used to say, "You're lucky we took you in," whenever I argued. The way he'd laugh when relatives commented that I didn't look like anyone else. The way he'd say, "You should be grateful," like gratitude was a leash. None of it had been accidental. It had been strategy. Morning came quietly. Sunlight spilled across the living room floor, soft and unassuming, like the world had no idea anything monumental had happened. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around the mug, grounding myself in the ordinary. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mother. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Her voice broke immediately. I didn't sleep. Neither did I said gently. I feel like I failed you, she whispered. I closed my eyes. You didn't know, I said, and I believe you. But I should have noticed, she said. You were always so careful, so anxious to please. I swallowed. That's what happens when love feels conditional, I replied. She sobbed quietly on the other end of the line. He admitted it, she said after a moment. Not everything, but enough. Did he apologize? I asked. No, she said softly. He said you provoked him. I let out a slow breath. That sounds like him. There was a pause. I told him he needs help, real help, or he will lose you permanently. And? I asked. He said he doesn't need help, he whispered. He said you've always been too sensitive. I almost laughed. Of course he did, I said. I don't know what to do, my mother said. I thought carefully before answering. You decide who you want to protect, and then you live with that choice. She didn't argue. Later that afternoon, my brother came over.
He looked tired, older, like someone whose internal picture of the world had been ripped in half. I keep thinking about things, he said, sitting across from me, stuff that didn't make sense before. Me too, I admitted. You always apologized first, he said, even when Dad was clearly wrong. I nodded. That's what you do when you're afraid of being discarded, I said. His face tightened. He did that to you, he said. Yes, I replied, and now he can't anymore. My brother leaned forward. What happens now? I shrugged. I set boundaries, I said, and I keep them. He hesitated. If Dad apologizes, would you... I didn't answer right away. An apology isn't enough, I said finally. I need accountability and change. He nodded slowly. That's fair. 2 days passed. Then 3. No contact from my father, which wasn't surprising. Silence was his favorite punishment. Only this time, it didn't work. On the 4th day, I received an email. From him. Not a call, not a text. An email. Formal, detached, carefully written. I never intended to hurt you. Families say things they regret. You escalated a private matter into a public spectacle. I expect an apology for humiliating me in my own home. I read it twice, then once more, and something unexpected happened. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. I typed my response slowly. You announced a lie about my identity to control me. I played a recording to stop you. That is not humiliation. That is consequence. I'm open to a relationship that includes accountability, therapy, and respect. Until then, I'm stepping back. I didn't soften it. I didn't justify it. I sent it. My hands didn't shake. That was new. That evening, my husband asked, "Do you think he'll change?" I thought about my father, about control, about fear. I think he'll try. Whether he actually does is up to him. Are you okay with that? He asked. Yes, I replied, because for the first time, his choices aren't my responsibility. That weekend, my mother came to visit alone. She looked fragile but determined. I started therapy, she said quietly, sitting down. I raised my eyebrows. Really? She nodded. I realized I've been surviving him, not living with him. That sentence hit me harder than the recording had. I'm proud of you, I said. She reached for my hand. I don't expect you to forgive him, she said. I just want you to know I choose you. Tears filled my eyes. That means everything, I said. Before she left, she hugged me tightly. You're stronger than I ever was, she whispered. I shook my head gently. No, I said. I just stopped being afraid. Weeks passed. Life settled into a new shape. Quieter, lighter. I laughed more easily. I slept deeper. I spoke without rehearsing first. And every now and then, I'd think about that blue cassette tape. How close it came to being erased. How easily the truth can be lost if no one protects it. Some stories only survive because someone remembers to press record. If you're still here, still following along, it's probably because some part of this feels familiar. Not the details, but the dynamic. The way power hides behind family. The way truth gets labeled as disrespect. These are the stories I tell now. Not because they're dramatic, but because they're real. And because somewhere, someone needs to know they're not imagining it. Sometimes the evidence already exists. Sometimes the lie just forgot it was being recorded. And the story? It's not over yet. The first boundary is always the hardest, not because it's unclear, but because it's new. I had spent my entire life reacting to my father, instead of defining myself in relation to him. My moods shifted based on his approval. My confidence rose and fell depending on whether he was pleased. Even my silence had been shaped by the anticipation of his displeasure. Now there was space, and space is unsettling when you've been conditioned to fill it with compliance. The week after I sent that email, nothing happened. No reply, no escalation, no sudden apology or explosion. Just absence. At first, my body didn't trust it. I kept checking my phone, half expecting his name to flash across the screen with some new version of blame disguised as concern. But it didn't. Instead, something else happened. I started remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. Like the time I was 10 and won a regional writing contest. My teacher had been ecstatic. My classmates clapped. I came home glowing, certificate clutched in my hands. My father glanced at it once and said, "Don't get a big head. Talent without discipline means nothing." I'd folded the certificate and shoved it into a drawer. I never entered another contest. Or the way he used to record my teenage arguments, replaying my own shaky voice back to me later to prove how irrational I sounded. I had learned early that my words could be weaponized, so I chose them carefully.
Too carefully. Now, those memories weren't just painful, they were explanatory. They told a coherent story, one where my fear had been cultivated deliberately. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. My brother called one evening, his voice low. "He's not doing well," he said. I leaned against the counter, phone pressed to my ear. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied honestly. "He's angry," my brother continued, "at you, at Mom, at everyone." "That doesn't surprise me," I said. "He says you've turned the family against him." I closed my eyes. "I didn't turn anyone," I said. "I told the truth." My brother was quiet. "He keeps saying you betrayed him," he added. "That's easier than saying he betrayed me," I replied. There was a long pause. "I don't know how to be in the middle of this," my brother admitted. "You don't have to be," I said. "You're allowed to step out of the line of fire." "That's what you're doing, isn't it?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "and it's the healthiest thing I've ever done." Later that night, my husband and I sat on the couch, legs tangled, the television on but muted. "Do you regret it?" he asked gently. "Playing the recording?" I asked. "Standing up," he clarified. I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "I regret that it took me so long to believe I was allowed to." He smiled softly. "You changed something," he said. "I know, and that's what scares him." Because when people like my father lose control, they don't suddenly become humble, they become desperate. The next move came 2 weeks later, not directly from him, from extended family. An aunt called, voice overly cheerful. "I hear things are tense," she said. "That's one word for it," I replied. "You know your father," she continued. "He has a temper, but he loves you." I didn't rise to it. "Love doesn't manipulate identity," I said calmly. She laughed awkwardly. "You've always been sensitive." There it was again, the old narrative, dusted off and reused. "I've always been observant," I corrected. "There's a difference." She didn't know what to say to that. Another relative messaged urging reconciliation before it's too late. I replied once, "Reconciliation requires accountability, not silence." After that, I stopped responding, because I wasn't interested in being recruited back into my own erasure. The most surprising shift came from my mother. She started speaking differently, not cautiously, deliberately.
One afternoon over coffee, she said, "I didn't realize how much of myself I gave up keeping the peace." I looked at her, startled. "What do you mean?" I asked. She stared into her cup. "I learned to stay quiet because it was safer," she said. "But safe isn't the same as healthy." That sentence felt like a mirror. "I don't know who I am without him directing everything," she admitted. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You get to find out now," I said. She smiled sadly. "Watching you do it gave me courage," she said. "I hadn't expected that. I hadn't done any of this to inspire anyone. I'd done it to survive. But sometimes survival looks like leadership to people who are still trapped." A month after the dinner, my father finally responded again, not with an apology, with conditions. He sent a message through my brother. "He'll meet with you," my brother said, "but only if you promise not to bring up the recording again." I laughed quietly. "No," I said. "He says it was a violation," my brother added. "It was documentation," I replied. "There's a difference." "He also wants you to apologize," my brother said, hesitant. "For what?" I asked. "For embarrassing him." I shook my head. "I didn't embarrass him, I exposed him." My brother sighed. "He won't like that answer." "I'm not responsible for his comfort," I replied. That was the sentence that sealed it. I didn't hear from my father after that. Not directly, but I heard about him, how he told anyone who would listen that I'd been brainwashed, how he claimed my husband was controlling me, how he reframed the recording as taken out of context. It didn't matter. The people who believed him always would have. The people who mattered didn't. One evening, while organizing old boxes, I found something unexpected. The rest of the tapes, labeled in my father's handwriting. Dates, topics, names. I sat on the floor, holding one, and felt a wave of nausea. He'd documented so much.
Not for memory. For leverage. I didn't listen to them. I didn't need to. The power they held was gone. They only mattered in a world where his voice was the final authority. That world no longer existed. If you're still with me here, it's probably because you recognize this stage. The quiet after confrontation, when everything reorganizes itself, when the villain doesn't vanish, but their shadow shrinks. This is where real change happens, not in explosions, in distance, in clarity, in the steady realization that you don't have to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. And stories like this, ones where the truth isn't dramatic but deliberate, are why I keep telling them, not as lessons, as reminders, for anyone who's ever wondered if they're allowed to stop playing along. The answer is yes, and the final part of this story isn't about my father. It's about what happens when his voice finally stops being the loudest one in my head. The silence didn't end with a bang. It faded, slowly, quietly, like a radio losing signal the farther you drive from the tower. For the first time in my life, my father's voice wasn't the loudest one in my head when I made a decision. It wasn't there when I woke up. It didn't narrate my mistakes or predict my failures. It didn't tell me to be careful, be grateful, be smaller. At first, that absence felt unsettling. Then it felt like peace. The day I realized it had truly loosened its grip was ordinary in the most unexpected way. I was standing in the grocery store staring at 2 brands of pasta when I reached for the cheaper one without a flicker of shame. No internal lecture, no imagined judgment, just a choice. That's how freedom arrives sometimes, not as a declaration, as a quiet moment where fear fails to show up. My father never apologized, not in the way people imagine apologies should come. No trembling voice, no acknowledgement of harm, no moment of humility. Instead, he did what men like him always do when they lose control. He rewrote the story. According to him, I was unstable, influenced, ungrateful. According to him, I had misunderstood everything. According to him, the recording had been taken out of context, the timing unfair, the exposure unnecessary, and according to him, the real crime was that I had embarrassed him. What he never said out loud, but everyone eventually understood, was this. He was angry that his authority had limits now. He was angry that the lie didn't work anymore. My mother moved into a small apartment 6 weeks later. She didn't announce it, she didn't dramatize it, she just packed quietly, like someone who had learned not to draw attention to herself. The first time I visited her there, she looked different, lighter. Not happier exactly, but less braced. "I don't know who I am yet," she said, sitting across from me at her small kitchen table, "but I know who I'm not anymore." That was enough. My brother adjusted too, in his own way. He stopped defending, stopped mediating, stopped asking me to make things easier for everyone else. "I didn't realize how much he trained us to orbit him," he said once. "You broke the gravity." I hadn't meant to. But once something breaks, you don't get to choose who notices the cracks. As for me, I stopped waiting. I stopped waiting for validation. I stopped waiting for permission. I stopped waiting for closure from a man who only ever offered control in its place. The truth is, playing that recording wasn't the bravest thing I did. Walking away without begging for understanding was. There were moments of grief, of course. You don't lose a parent like that without mourning the version you hoped they might become. I grieved the father I wanted, the one who could sit across from me and say, "I was wrong. I'm sorry. You deserved better." But I stopped confusing grief with obligation. I didn't owe him reconciliation at the cost of myself. Months passed, then a year. I built a life that didn't flinch. I spoke freely. I laughed loudly. I told stories without editing them for safety. Sometimes people would ask about my father, carefully, as if his name still held power. "He's not in my life," I'd say calmly, and that was it. No explanation, no justification, just truth. One afternoon, while cleaning out old files, I found the blue cassette tape again, the original one. I held it in my hands for a long time, turning it over, feeling its weight. It wasn't heavy, but it had carried so much. I didn't destroy it. I didn't listen to it again either. I put it back in the box and labeled it clearly, evidence. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me of something important. The truth doesn't need to be loud to be permanent. It just needs to be preserved long enough for someone to hear it. The last time I saw my father was at a distance, a family event I chose not to attend, a photo someone posted. He stood stiffly in the background, smiling without warmth, surrounded by people who no longer leaned the way they used to. Power looks different when people stop feeding it. I didn't feel triumph. I felt neutral, which felt like victory, because neutrality meant he no longer had access to my nervous system, and that was everything. If you're still here with me now, at the end of this story, it's probably because some part of it felt uncomfortably familiar. Not the cassette tape, not the dinner, but the dynamic. The way truth gets buried under authority, the way silence gets confused for loyalty. These are the stories I share now, not to relive them, but to release them. And if you ever find yourself drawn to stories like this, the kind that don't rush healing or glamorize confrontation, you already know where you've landed. This is what Scarlight Stories exists for, not to tell you what to think, but to remind you that you're not alone in recognizing it. My father announced I was adopted to put me in my place. What he didn't realize was that he handed me something far more powerful than humiliation. He handed me proof. And once the truth is yours, no one gets to use it against you again. Not ever.